Hello, everyone. It's Carolyn, and today I'm here with Dr. Jeff Hauswald, and he is the incoming superintendent for Boone County Schools. How are you today, Dr. Hauswald?
I'm great. Carolyn, thank you for this conversation.
So, I want to start today by asking something you ask people when you first meet them. Tell us your 2-minute story.
So you've been listening. Yeah, when I meet people today, I met a new person in the job I'm currently serving, and when I meet with students, I always tell people, "Tell me your 2-minute story," and I always say, "Tell me whatever you want me to know. Don't tell me anything you don't." And I always remind students that everyone has a unique story, and everyone's story is significant and special and worth telling. I think sometimes. People like to compare stories. And Teddy Roosevelt once said that comparison is the thief of joy. And take joy in your story. Don't compare. Just be proud of your story and know that you're unique and special and worthwhile. So you're turning the tables on me. People don't ask me my 2-minute story, so that's very clever. Um, my 2-minute story is that I grew up in an education family, and I've always been grounded in education, and I don't take that for granted. I um, I know that I'm privileged to have grown up understanding why education is important. There's a carving at the School of Education where I live that says education shall forever be encouraged, and I think that we have within public education employees an obligation to remind everyone that education shall always be encouraged, and that it is a really great right and privilege of everyone that lives in the United States. And so my 2-minute story is that I grew up in an education family. My dad was a science teacher, middle level science teacher. He taught for probably 35 years. And I grew up watching him teach, and the relationships he built with students. And we know that it's climate, it's relationships happen first before learning. And I came to learn that from him, and he was adored in the community. He's actually now a board member in his local school district. Yeah, and he's been for 20 years, but he told me he's not doing it anymore. And so my 2-minute story is that I grew up. What?
I said I don't blame him.
No, don't get ideas. So I grew up in it's a lot of work. Being a board member is a lot of work. So I grew up in an education family, and I always wanted to be a teacher. I grew up on a farm, and I always say that I appreciated education because I think I knew early I didn't want to be a farmer my whole life, but I learned to work from my agrarian roots. I grew up um, in a farm family that did both grain and cattle, and we also had Timothy alfalfa hay that we would raise for actually horse farmers for um, for horse farms. And so I learned to just sweat in those hay barns, and I learned the value of work, and I feel like that grounded me in my work ethic. And then I always want to be a teacher, so I went to Indiana University and studied math education. I wanted to be a math teacher, and I was, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. So my 2-minute story, I grew up in an agricultural area that is becoming somewhat more suburban. Lots of similarities to Boone County, and I grew up on the Ohio River Valley. I grew up in Indiana, but I grew up just a stone's throw from the. I mean, maybe if you're a really strong stone thrower, I grew up in Harrison County, Indiana, just 20 minutes from Louisville, and it that's kind of my background there. Went to IU, married my high school sweetheart, Cassie, and returned there. And I plan to teach my whole life. That's what I love doing. And but I had a superintendent that was also in the that was a superintendent in Kentucky for a while, and he saw something in me, saw leadership in me, and he just kept telling me, "You need to go into administration." And I resisted. He transferred me. So my 2-minute story then was that I became a high school assistant principal, and then a high school athletic director. And I didn't want to do that, but he said, you need to do all of these jobs because it'll make you relatable. You'll have empathy. You'll understand. And then he encouraged me to go back and to get my educational doctorate. I went back to Indiana University, and I served. Took the time there to earn my superintendent license, and then also my educational doctorate. And then a couple years later, he knocked on my door and he said, "You're going to go be an elementary principal." And I said, "No,
Oh, wow.
I'm secondary." And he said, "No, you have to come to understand why primary education is so hard and why elementary education is so important. You need to walk in their shoes, and it'll be your favorite job you ever have." And he's right. Aside from teaching, being an elementary principal was awesome. I loved it. I loved the relationships with the students and with the faculty and the staff and the families. And it was great. And then I became, the rest of it is less exciting. I became an assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction, so I could really understand the importance of teaching, instruction, and assessment. And then in 2010, somebody came and said, "Hey, would you be interested in applying for a superintendent position in Northern Indiana?" It was an urban setting, and I studied urban education. I really wanted to understand the effects of poverty on the experiences students have, the effects of students that may have a different first language from English. I wanted to understand other historically and other historically and systemically marginalized populations, and including students of color. And so anyway, I went to Kokomo, a majority minority, high poverty district, and served as superintendent there for 11 years. And then wanted to be closer to home, and then became superintendent of Monroe County Community School Corporation, which is a 10,000 plus student district in South Central Indiana, the home of Indiana University. My wife is Cassandra. My partner is an aquatic biologist, and she does a lot of her work in the Ohio River Valley. So there's always this push to get closer to home. And so when I saw that the job for Monroe, I was at Monroe County, when I saw the job for Boone County was open, it was ideal. It is a large district. We'll talk about why later, but nonetheless, then that's what led me to apply for that position. Cassie and I don't have any children, and we have 3 dogs, and we love the outdoors. And we'll talk a little bit about me later in terms of my 2-minute story. But I spend every minute I can outside. I'm a relationship person. I love to be in the schools. I love to meet students and staff and community members, family members, and I have a lot of energy. And so I'm always out in the schools, and I think that's a strength, and I think that's just part of who I am in my core fabric. It's part of my 2-minute story. And in our free time, we love hiking. We love being outside. I run marathons very slowly. So that's a little nugget of trivia about me. I'm trying to run a marathon in all 50 states. So I have 8 states to go. So matter of fact, when you all were interviewing me in person, I was just returning from Lincoln, Nebraska, where I had run my 42nd, technically my 43rd state marathon, because it's 50 states plus Washington, D.C. So you have to do 51. And that's sort of me in a nutshell. And I started going down the path of why I applied for the superintendent position at Boone County Schools, but that's not who I am now. That's who I aspired to be.
Well, you do have a packed resume, and you've got a lot to offer from that experience. And no doubt you had other offers from other districts. And what I'd like to know is, what was it about Boone that made you choose us? Because yes, we chose you, but you also chose us.
Yeah, it takes 2 to tango, right? And
Yes.
you have to have a board that is extending an offer, which I feel completely blessed to have that vote of confidence from the board. But of course, the superintendent has to want to be there. If not, it's not going to work. And Boone County was my first choice. Here's why. First of all, it is when you study Boone County schools and Boone County in general, they support public education. I hope we'll talk about the importance of public education some more later. If not, maybe you can add that question. But Boone County Schools is a high-performing, highly successful school district that understands public education, this is my impression, right? At a macro level. In other words, they understand why it requires why public education is there to serve students, why that is essential, why I would consider that to be essential infrastructure, right? And I see that in the comments, in the support of the local schools. They see every school as being unique. They see every school as being successful, and every school having different needs, but also different opportunities. But overall, they understand why every student needs to have some basic minimal guarantees, educational experiences through the strategic plan. We'll talk about that later. It's a large district, which means it's a complex district, but they are clearly engaged in all of the communities within Boone County and as a whole. And so that's attractive to me professionally. You have a strategic plan. If you really boil that strategic plan down, you have four key tenets of that strategic plan. And within that, it's that world-class education piece, that piece that really focuses on student learning, student experiences, and how you're preparing students for college, career, service, life. And then you have a piece on your workforce, which says we want the best staff. We want to continue to empower them, create leaders, and invest in them both financially, professional development, and learning and opportunities. Then you have that part on stakeholder engagement, right? That says, we need to make sure that our community, our families, our parents, our guardians that are part of this process, part of the educational decisions, as well as our businesses, our nonprofit organizations, our government leaders, all of these stakeholders. And then the fourth part is very important. That's on operation and resource optimization. That says like we don't want to waste money. We want to respect our taxpayers. We want to make sure that we're doing the most we can with the right amount of money, which requires optimization and efficiency. And there's two parts to that. Number one is making sure we put our money where it most impacts student learning. And number two, making sure that we have the money and the resources we need, but we don't take advantage of our taxpayers, right? Many of them are living paycheck by paycheck. And so we need to, I believe that from my initial introduction, people in Boone County understand the importance of public ed. They support it, but they say, don't take advantage of that. And so that strategic plan, that roadmap was significant to me, along with the profile of a graduate, right? Which says these are the things we want our students not only to know, but this metacognitive piece, this big, good communicators. We want to be able to collaborate, right? And be part of a team. We want them to have a learner's mindset. That's that lifelong learner piece that says, hey, learning doesn't stop when you get that diploma in 12th grade. Exactly. And whether that is learning on the job, whether that's learning at a 2 or 4 year institution or some sort of post high school educational training, whether that's learning about life, right? We're all learners. We're learners forever, and we want to embrace that. It talks about integrity, those ethical pieces, right? About honesty and trust and respect, and then being a global citizen, right? If you look at Boone County as part of the greater Cincinnati area, the world is changing, and we want to be sure we're able to adapt and to compete individually and as a community for economic growth. And so there's all of those pieces. And what I learned was when I began studying Boone County is they understand both economic vitality, but they also understand quality of life. And quality of life is important. We want to make sure that communities in Boone County have good quality of life, good opportunities, access to green space and parks and services. And it seemed to have all that. So it was the whole package. And that excited me about it. And then I kind of mentioned that personally, we grew up in the Ohio River Valley. We love it there. I grew up with my mom listening to on the AM radio to Joe Nuxall, and she would listen to Cincinnati Reds on the AM radio. And once or twice a year, that was the local team when you were in the Louisville market. So once or twice a year, we'd go over to watch the Reds play. And I love the Cincinnati region. I've always been a Reds fan, incidentally, because of that. My mom still is. And the other thing is, she would. We didn't have a lot of money, so she had I don't know. I told the story, but she had a dime bank, and it sat on we had this 1970s kitchen with like Carolyn that had orange and brown and ivory and maybe yellow striped walls. And she had this bank, and it was a dime bank. And like once a week or so, she would empty out her coin purse and she'd put all the dimes in the dime bank. And then around Mother's Day, she would dump the dimes out on the counter. She'd roll them, she'd cash them in, and she'd use that to buy tickets to Kings Island. So we would go to Kings Island every Memorial Day Sunday with my family. And, as a kid driving up 71, we'd stop, of course, in the Boone County area, the rest area, and we would we'd have donuts. And then I couldn't wait to get down into the Ohio River Valley, and we'd start watching for the Eiffel Tower. And so we went to Kings Island once a year on the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend. I remember going to the Reds games, and I have just nothing but great memories. Older, different memories of Cincinnati, but it's a great area. And my wife is an aquatic biologist, and she's working on water quality issues in the Ohio River Valley for a nonprofit. Her area of expertise is molluscology, which is freshwater mollusks, and she's working in some of the rivers in Boone County and in the other areas that feed in. So it's a natural fit for us. She works a lot in Cincinnati, Louisville, St. Louis, all the waterways that feed into the Ohio River. So for her, it's a great fit. She wants to be close to the Ohio River. We grew up there. So, I think that for it to be a right fit, number one, the school district has to be aligned philosophically in doing the right work. Number two, you want a community that supports public education, and it has to be something that is a good opportunity for me professionally. And then number three, it has to be the right fit for the family. So it hit all those things. And you're right. I had applying for other jobs, and I was very clear with the Boone County, both the chair and the board, that Boone County was my preference. And I wanted, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, and I was hoping that that offer from Boone County would come before I had to make a decision elsewhere. And so, listen, it all lined up. It's the right place to be. I am excited to start July 1st, but that's the why. It has to be.
I'm excited for you to start too. So.
Yeah, it has to be a good fit for the school community, a good fit for me professionally, and a good fit for me personally. And when I went through my 2-minute story, I told you a little bit of my window into my soul, but also professionally, all my experiences. I've been a superintendent for 14 years, assistant superintendent for 4, and I like to be able to relate with our staff, and I feel like from my teaching and my coaching, I was a coach for a while, athletic director, high school and elementary administration, and the district level. Kind of having all those experiences helps. So hopefully that answers your question on why.
It does. And you did talk about how you view from your knowledge that Boone County is very supportive of public education.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that. But I do think that the majority of the people that are our strongest supporters of public education are more, I guess, more timid or more nervous to engage in support of public education, at least outwardly and publicly. And we'll talk a little bit later about what's coming up on our ballot here in November. But I want to know, how important is it for them to vocally support public education? And how would you encourage them to be more outwardly supportive of public education?
Well, first of all, we'd rather have a silent majority, right, than a silent minority
Yes.
that supports public ed. So it's thrilled to have it. But what we want to make sure is that we're outreaching to everybody, so that hopefully we can get them more engaged. First of all, we appreciate the support, but we want them to also be sharing their story, because we want to make sure that silent majority becomes a vocal majority. That is, first of all, telling us what we're doing well, but then what we can improve on, right? So we're meeting the community's needs,
Yes.
but also so that collectively there's a shared understanding of why public education is both America, Kentucky, and Boone County's best asset, right? I mean, 100%. In Kentucky, we know that like 98% of people went through public education, and we know that everyone has this shared experience, and it also serves as a great equalizer. Everyone had that shared experience. That's how you create a community, right? And so we want to continue that legacy and making sure that our schools are providing access and opportunity to all students. We're meeting every student, and we do that through our variety of programming, right? And that's going to get back to school choice. Like school choice means that every student has access to a high quality public education, which they do in Boone County, right?
Yes,
But that we
100%.
have a variety of programs. It's program choice within Boone County. So that means that if you need a smaller school, a school that has a more STEM focus, right? A career focus, right? These all exist in Boone County. And that's why people support public education, because we're meeting their needs. And those needs have changed today in the 21st century, right? Than the 20th century. And they're going to continue to change. And we have to make sure that as there are new learning needs, or students want to learn different ways. You kind of mentioned this in during there are some students that may want a smaller classroom setting. They may want a more hybrid approach. They may want a more hands-on approach, project-based approach. We've got to make sure we continue to meet every student's needs. I mean, that's why I sat down and talked to students every month. I have to, and say, what is it that we're missing? And sometimes it's just simply design. It's like I've had students say, we're just not comfortable in the classroom. It's uncomfortable. We sit there. It's hard to learn when you're uncomfortable, and you need to improve your design. We've had that for food service in my current job. It's like, we need to improve our food. So all of those things, we have to be responsive to students, to families, to our community, right? To make sure that people understand and still believe that public education is a good investment, right? So
Yes.
I think that's why public education, it works, and it has worked for 200 plus years, and it is a great asset in Boone County and in Kentucky, as well as in the United States, and in places where we have begun defunding public education or shifting funds. We're seeing different results. So we'll talk about that a little later on. But that's why public education matters, and why we want to make sure that silent majority becomes vocal.
Well, one of the things that I think kind of flipped that switch to where people kind of went in hiding had to be COVID, because that created a very different environment than what public education was used to, especially at board meetings.
That's right. It was the hardest time in education, I believe, for any employee, parent, teacher, superintendent, board member. It was tough. I mean, there was, in trauma-informed education, when people have traumatic events, right, it can stop learning. And COVID was a traumatic event. I mean, people were losing loved ones. They were losing access. They were, people were losing jobs. So there was food scarcity. And it was something we never experienced. And so we have to acknowledge that it was hard. But we also learned that during times like that, our students needed access to education. And that when we took away that access, it disproportionately harmed our students of poverty, right? And so, or our English learners, for example, because perhaps they were, our English learners were at a home where perhaps there wasn't English spoken. And, we know that through fluency, that surrounding yourself with someone that speaks English is one of the best ways to learn English. So, I mean, COVID impacted different people in different ways, but it didn't impact everybody in the same way. And when schools were closed, we now are learning that disproportionately affected many of our marginalized populations. And so, I know that the Boone County Board, I know I, as a superintendent, fought hard to get our doors open and to find ways to serve our students, keep them safe, right? Acknowledge that, but also we know that we need to be open, responsive, and it created some division. And I think we're seeing that now. But we also are seeing people come together and understand now. I think there are people that maybe took education for granted that now don't. They're like, you know what? We've come to realize how valuable, because when you take away something that you've always had, suddenly you realize how important it is. So education was taken away from people, and it shouldn't have been. But we realize now just how important education is. I think it's brought together people in many ways, but also created some division in how the decision process was handled. And there were no perfect decisions. There were no easy decisions. But what we learned from that is that we want to make sure that we continue to find ways to serve our students, and our doors are open to serve students. And I applaud everyone who fought to do that. And I was one of them. So
Awesome. Well, I know that a lot of people in our community will love to hear that. And, we had it was abnormal in our home during COVID because I had a student that actually thrived in that environment.
and that's okay. But that doesn't mean every student did.
Exactly. And so it's just interesting, the perspective, because we realized from her a different learning style was appropriate for her.
Yeah.
And
the nice thing about that is, Carolyn, is that by learning that, you can provide some of those similar learning opportunities for your child going forward. But I think it's human nature to sort of extrapolate that what works best for us works best for everyone else.
Exactly.
And then and it's human nature sometimes, unfortunately, to try to impose what we want on everyone else. And we want to stick with research-based, what's best for students. And we know there are huge important social benefits to students being with their peers and learning. We know that. And if there are students that for whom that isn't the best environment, we want to make sure we accommodate that. But yeah, we don't want to extrapolate these generalizations on every student. And it's exactly what you're acknowledging, that even though that your student may have thrived, it takes a lot of humility and a lot of awareness for you to say, but I know that may not have been best for every other student. And so
I look at my youngest in that same contrast, and she didn't not thrive in that environment, but she did lose out from the social aspect.
That's right.
She is a social butterfly, and it's not that she needs.
Yeah,
she was able to do it. Yeah, you did meet her. And she's able to learn
apple meet tree. As the daughter met her mother.
But it's so just in everybody's household, I think it was just a different experience, and you saw the wide range of educational needs just within your household. And when you see that in your house, it's hard to not transpose that onto your community and realize, if I have two different needs in my own house, what does our community look like? And how do we best meet so many different needs that our students have? And public education's in this unique place because we're forced to address all of those needs.
That's right.
Private institutions are not. We are. And that's what I think is missed.
You're right. And private institutions are not required to address the needs of every student. So, and that can be, we in public education do provide services for special education to students who go to private schools, because private schools aren't required to provide those services in many cases, nor in some cases charters aren't either. It depends how they're designed. The great thing about Boone County schools is they serve all students. No questions asked. No questions asked. We don't ask them what they believe. We don't ask them we don't ask them up front, do you have a disability? We don't ask them to show us their test scores, right? And we don't say, well, we're an elite institution. You got to be in the top 1% to get into our school. We don't ask those things, and we shouldn't, and we're not going to. But there are institutions that do. And so what happens is, if you start funding those institutions as they are in Indiana, schools are becoming segregated again. And the worst thing we can do is return to a type of segregation based on academic performance or based on socioeconomic status or any of those other factors. We know that students as they become adults, they're going to work in an environment where people look, think, and believe differently than them. And so the best preparation for that, and you have this in your learner profile, is to make sure our students can collaborate, communicate, and work with students that are different than them. So why do we want to create learning environments? Why would we want to create new funding mechanisms that could segregate students, right, and not create environments for learning in which students are around people different than them? And I don't know if you're going to ask this, but I know there's an upcoming constitutional referendum vote. We've had for 15 years had what they call a choice state. But what we have to be careful about is a couple things. And these are questions that I ask. Number one is, where is the additional funding? If you're going to provide funding for additional students, right, that may already be in private education, where's that funding coming from? Is it going to be an additional tax? And our taxpayers know they're voting on that? I don't know. And if not, does that mean that we're going to be serving more students with the same amount of money? which means there's going to be less funding for existing students. That's what's kind of happened in Indiana, because what we've seen is since they've implemented this a choice state in Indiana through vouchers and charters, is that funding going forward hasn't kept up with inflation, which means that Indiana's teacher salaries are the lowest of any adjacent state. So Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois have significantly higher salaries. As a matter of fact, over the last 25 years, Indiana ranks 50 out of 50 states in terms of wage growth. And so then they have massive teacher shortages. So I think the first question we have to say is, if we're going to fund additional students, how are we going to pay for it? Yes. And the voters need to be aware of that. And then number two, are we increasing student choice or are we increasing school choice? Because school choice means that a new school gets to choose who they educate and who they don't. Boone County schools wouldn't do that. And I know the public schools I serve don't do that. But student choice implies that a student can choose whatever school they want to go to. And what I've learned in Indiana is that's not true. The reality is that it is school choice, not student choice. And so public education, student choice. All students have access to their local public school. And so these are some questions I have that I think that as a community, we want to have a conversation about so that we understand not only the importance of public education, but what school choice with air quotes looks like going forward, and what is the fiscal impact of that, and what would be the impact of students that may not have that choice. In rural Indiana, as with rural Kentucky, if they don't have access to a private or to a charter school, the reality is they don't have more choice. If they don't have more choice, but less funding comes to these areas, what does that mean for them? So, I think that conversation may look different in rural Kentucky than it does in urban, suburban Kentucky. But I know in Indiana, rural education is struggling. They have much less money, much less resources, and they have the same students.
Yeah, so I know that's been the case in Kentucky for generations, even after the Kira Act and the Rose decision happened. It's still been a struggle, even with the SEEK formula. And it is a struggle. But if you add more students in urban and suburban areas where there's additional private schools, and you don't increase the taxes, right? You don't increase the funding source, but you increase the number of students you're funding, the overall per student. And in Indiana, the per student funding originally was a decrease of about $100, and now it's over $300 per student from the impact. So we just have to have a conversation and understand. And I'm not taking a position on it right now. I just have questions, and I think we all have to have these questions answered so that we are informed as individuals and as a community before we make decisions of whether or not we want to become a choice state in Kentucky. Yeah, and I agree with that. And that's actually how I've been framing it when I speak to people. I'm like, you really need to ask more questions about this because there's a lot of unknown factors that could impact the greater good. That's right. And it could also, and I know Boone County is very particular on increasing taxes. You'll find that out in August when we discuss the tax levy increase. Yeah. But they're very passionate about not increasing taxes in our community. And this would do that. I can't see a way where it would not. I can't either, but we need our those that are right now it's a general question, right? But then the devil is in the details, as they say. Show me how you can become a choice state, not increase taxes without reducing funding or for public education and for the current schools and districts and students that you serve. Tell me how that works. And if you can show me that, I might be open to a different conversation. Well, and I think that's why I'm nervous about the way that it's worded. Is it's really open-ended. There's not a lot backing it up or saying what they're wanting to do with it. Like, what is the intent of the amendment? Right. And so you're left to speculate without the information. And now, I will tell you, if we did that as a board, we would have gone out there and said, we're going to do this. We would have that. What I hear you saying, Carolyn, is that you may not be in favor of the amendment, the constitutional change, only because there aren't enough details. Get the details, and then let's have that conversation. Exactly. And I think most taxpayers would agree with that.
Yeah. And
And
it's worked in Kentucky for how long? I mean, Kentucky was the 18th state in the union. In public education, it existed for a majority of the time since it's joined the union as Commonwealth. So what we want to make sure is that we have all of the details, all of the plans before we upend something that has worked for more than a century.
so, well, I know that you have things you need to get to, so I'm going to ask one last question,
Okay.
and it's pretty open-ended, but because it's been great speaking with you today and going down
Thank you.
so many different avenues. But before we close, like, is there something that you would like to share with the community that you want people to know or to expect when you step foot into that role on July 1?
Yeah, I said this to the board and I said this to the committee that I don't have a blueprint. Um, I plan to, as they say, hit the ground listening, and that's coming to understand the community, understanding what the board objectives are, and then working for solutions. I have ideas. We all do, right? We all have experiences. You're hiring a superintendent with experience, but don't look at what I did in Kokomo, right? Or what I did as a teacher in South Harrison. Things change. When you open this conversation about what is my 2-minute story, and I responded, every 2-minute story, every person's story is unique. Every community is unique. Every community's needs are unique. So it would be, I mean, flippant of me to say, hey, I'm going to do exactly what I did in Kokomo or in Corydon or Bloomington and apply that. It doesn't work. But we have experiences, and those experiences make us richer, right?
Yes.
To make us more knowledgeable and to try to work within the confines that exist, right? And the realities that exist in Boone County and lead the district forward to continue to meet the strategic plan. And how do we meet the strategic plan? We increase student learning, right? And student learning opportunities. We increase teacher learning and teacher opportunities. We increase community engagement, and we make sure that we do so in an efficient way that respects taxpayer dollars, while making sure we understand and we meet the graduate profile, which is more than just the learning piece, but also that metacognitive piece, all of that. And so what I do is I come with a process to do that, not with solutions. It'd be very arrogant for me to come in and say, this is what you need. I'm not going to do that. And it's all about relationships. And I think that you'll find that I did that in Kokomo and also in Bloomington. And also sometimes change is hard. And,
Yes.
what we have to make sure we understand is that we want to make sure we're aware that ultimately when we identify changes that need to take place, they may not always be popular, but are they right for kids? We have to be student focused in our decisions. And if we do that in the end, Carolyn, and the decisions we make are ethical and they're good for
Yes.
kids and they're right and they're just, then I and the board and the community, I can sleep at night knowing that we made a difference for kids that's lasting and impactful. And if we've done that, then what more can we ask for?
I agree. And I'm glad to hear a lot of your language is student first, student first, student
Absolutely. It has
first.
to be. It has to be.
It has
Because
to
by
be.
the way, without students, we don't have a job. I don't have a job.
Well, that's
And we
true.
don't need a board of school trustees if we don't have students, do we?
Yes. Nope. And we just, I don't know what we would do, but no, I'm appreciative that you have mentioned the community frequently as well. I know that
Thank you.
people are going to be happy to hear that because the
And
community just wants to be heard.
that's right. And earlier in the interview, you pointed out that it I said it takes two to tango, but you point out very wisely that the board's picking a superintendent's picking a board. And one of the reasons I became even more excited after the series of conversations I had with the board was that I found 5 board members that put students first. And I put 5 student board members that cared about the community they're serving. They don't want to be disruptive. They want to make things better, but they want that change to be lasting and sustainable. And Carolyn, I know I learned this about you. I learned how deeply, deeply committed you are to public education and to the students in Boone County and to the community. You said, Jeff, I live in this community. I plan to stay in this community, and we're not going to mess this up. We're going to make meaningful change. And that was so affirming to me of all 5 board members. I know how invested you are in this work. And I think sometimes people only, they only see the the snippet of a decision being made, and don't understand how hard these decisions are, and just how grounded you've become in making that decision based upon a whole host of factors, but taking it all back to students. And when I found out how committed all 5 of the board members are to the students and making lasting change that's impactful, I went home from that last conversation and told Cassie, this is the place I want to be. And I haven't changed my opinion on that. So thanks for the opportunity for the conversation.
Well, we are very excited to have you, and I'm looking forward to July 1st and a new beginning, and seeing how much we can do just to impact our kids, because I think we're going to do some great things.
I think so too. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.